name is Maurice Cherry, and I'm with Greenville Chautauqua, and I'm on the board. We have a number of other members here. I want to introduce all of them to you, but we're so glad that you came tonight, and I want to invite you to the other events that will be taking place later. But first of all, I wanted to call your attention to the table at the very back. Some of you came in, and you saw that we have Chautauqua items out there. We urge you not only to pick up a copy of The History Alive for yourself, but if you have neighbors, if you have friends at Ollie, if you have friends at church, if you have friends in any kind of association you belong to who should know about Chautauqua, please feel free to take a pack of them. We don't want you to waste them, but sometimes I have people who will ask me for them, and I know they're sometimes a little bit hard to find later in the season. So please feel free to take 3, 4, 5, 20 if you know that you have people who will use them. We don't want you to just dispose of them, but please feel free to do that. Also, look at the back of the room. On the table, we have some of the current things that belong to the Greenville County Library: books, materials, tapes, all kinds of video options, and you're welcome to take those with you tonight if you sign them out at the front desk. And you have to do that. You have to have a Greenville Library card. So if you don't have a Greenville Library card, you can take a few minutes and do that tonight too. But you really do need to check that out. But there are other things there that you'll be interested in as well. I want to remind you too that this is not the very last talk, but there are only 2 more Tuesday monthly talks left. There's one in April and there's one in May, and you can find those information about those as well in the back. And we'd love to have you come back next month and the following month and hear about 2 of the other people who will be doing presentations for Chautauqua. I think we've tried to make it very clear that tonight is not a costume performance. I'm not in costume. Larry Bounds is not in costume as Cass. He's not going to do that tonight. That's not his deal. But anyway, you will have an opportunity to see all of these people in June when we have our presentations coming in. I would remind you that we need more volunteers for Chautauqua, people to help us with publicity, people to help us when we have our actual presentations, and we're trying to get set up and we're trying to take down the sets after each of the presentations all over town. And the schedule, very elaborate presentation schedule, is here in the booklet. And so again, we want you to take that, look at it, send it to other people who might be interested in that. And finally, Brian, at the back of the room, wants to say a word or two about one little card that they have on the table. You had music tonight when you came in, and this afternoon, my wife can attest to this, but I had not gone through my LPs literally in years and years. And I said, okay, I have that iconic album, Mamas and the Papas, We're in the Bathtub. How many of you at some time had that copy? A couple of you know what I'm talking about. Very famous album where all 4 of them are in a bathtub together. It's a very iconic, real use of iconic there. And so I thought about that, and so we listened to things, and some of the things that you heard tonight when you came in. So anyway, he's going to talk about the card that he has here. It's in the back of the table, on the back of the room, I'm sorry. Thank you, Brian. And also, since Brian is on the library staff, I am going to say, if you are able, I stress if you are able, and you have time, you have a few minutes at the end of the program tonight, as at the end of all of these Tuesday monthly programs, if you can help us get the chairs over to the side of the room or wherever you're asked to put them, that would be very helpful to the library staff and the people who are working here as volunteers. And again, if you want to be a volunteer in some capacity, there is a place for you to sign up at the back of the room there. Our speaker tonight, Larry Bounds, has little need of an invitation to most of you. He's done presentations. He himself has been a Chautauqua representer, not just here in Greenville, but all over various parts of the country, from Florida to Colorado. He's known nationally in the Chautauqua organization for the things that he does. He has performed as Churchill, as Einstein, as Ripley, as Walt Disney, as Walter Cronkite, and he's quite amazing, all of the things that he can do. And he's a nationally certified teacher. He was at Wade Hampton High School. Some of you may have even had him years ago, or your children had him as one of their teachers. And somebody was telling me just before we came in here that my son or daughter wanted to take classes but never could get in them. They were full. I thought that's amazing to have a high school teacher that popular. But anyway, he was a national board certified teacher, and I've been in the field of education for a long time, and to me, I understand that's something that's very, very important and very hard to attain. He was trained at the Clarence Brown Theater Company and earned a BA in theater and later an MS in education from the University of Tennessee. He also served as an officer for the university's Phi Delta Kappa Teaching Society. He lives in Greer with his wife, Carol, and I'm sure you will enjoy hearing him and giving him an opportunity to answer your questions after the presentation. So he's going to talk to you, give you a chance to say whatever you would like to, and ask him questions that he could elaborate on. So thank you very much for coming this evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who heard some of the music when we first started, did it sound a bit familiar? Okay. There are those of us of an age, notice the age here, that remember this firsthand. I'm going to ask what I hope is not an embarrassing question, but a significant question for our discussion tonight. And I will raise my hand because I was there. How many of you remember sitting in front of your television set and watching the Ed Sullivan Show the night the Beatles premiered in America? Aha, okay. When I refer to that later, because there was actually in Los Angeles a party going on that night. And at that party, hosted by Cass Elliot, some of the future greatest musicians in pop music and rock and roll were all there, because as the Rolling Stone referred to Cass Elliot, she was the queen of LA popular music. She hosted parties, everybody turned out. It was where people met and compared and changed and went from one band to another band. She was this coordinator. She brought them all together and they watched the Beatles. All of them were folk singers watching the Beatles. And when it was over, they all knew they had to do something different from that point on. Now, there were those who said, no, let's keep doing the same thing. Everybody loves Oh, Susanna. But there was a movement on, and it was people who had been making their living as folk singers who decided to change their game. You don't have to have a banjo. You could actually play a guitar. You could actually play an electric guitar. You could have a drum set in the back. The Beatles had shown the way, and it's going to change the course of music throughout the 60s, the 70s, and beyond. So, our presentation tonight is about Cass Elliot. Notice I've struck out Mama Cass Elliot, because by the end of her time with us, she was ready to put the mamas and the papas, the Mama Cass, behind her. Though most people today who are familiar with her will more quickly pull up Mama Cass as the reference and know who you're talking about than if you call her Cass Elliot. But she was making the move away from just being one of the mamas and the papas and establishing herself as an independent, and she was a very independent, successful musician who made her own kind of music, which was a very important part of this. So tonight we shall explore who this lovely lady is, Mama Cass Elliot, or Cass Elliot. Look at that smile. It's amazing. It's contagious. No wonder she was the one who drew all these people to her. I picked these pictures just as, there's a lot of pictures available from her on the web, but I thought these were all suitably symbolic, because in the next picture, her arms are outstretched, welcoming people, bringing people together, presenting herself to the world. In the next picture, you feel the power of this amazing voice that she had, that lifted songs to the heavens. And I thought that captured it. But most of all, from her album, Don't Call Me Mama Anymore, that picture of her in the pink pantsuit with the umbrella, balanced on one foot like she's walking on a tightrope. And I found that very symbolic. Imagine now she's left the mamas and the papas. She's on a solo career, with all the dangers of going on a solo career. A lot of even other people from the mamas and the papas are not going to make it on a solo career. She's balancing success and failure. She's balancing her own kind of music with the kind of music that she's being told she has to produce. She's balancing the possibility of addiction versus sobriety. There's a lot going on, a lot that she's balancing it, but she's doing it with a big smile. She's doing it with confidence, and that's how she approached life. So let's see who Cass Elliot is. First off, her name's Ellen. Ellen Naomi Cohen was her actual name. Cass Elliot was her stage name. Ellen Naomi Cohen was born in 1941. Her mother, pictured here, she's with her mother. Her mother was a trained nurse. She was born in Baltimore, Maryland. Her father went through several attempts at different careers, had a little difficulty getting established and settled and finding his thing. But eventually he did. The family, early on after she was born, moved to Alexandria, Virginia. And in Alexandria, her father discovered the ability to earn a living running a food truck. He'd pull up to a factory, lunchtime, run a food truck, and he achieved his success. This is a very middle-class American, start your own business, get skilled training, do things, raise a family. She has a brother. She has a sister. The sister, by the way, will also go into music. I'll mention her later. But that's her family. She's in Alexandria until she's in high school. And in high school, parents did to her one of the most horrible things parents can do to any high schooler. They moved back to Baltimore. Not that Baltimore is not a place to be in. Of course, it was very important in the news today. Baltimore was in the news all morning today. But they moved back to Baltimore, and she has to change high schools. So she changes high schools, and that's always difficult. But in her new high school, she discovers a love for theater. She says later that she saw people on stage, she saw people on television and the movies, and they seemed to be having so much fun. She wanted that. She wanted that. So she became involved in theater there with her school. She's in the school play. That following summer, she gets a job in summer stock in Owens Mill, Maryland, where she's performing all summer in summer stock. She thought it was great. She returns for her senior year. She goes almost all the way to graduation and does what very few people would have the courage to do. Skip graduation, leave school, go to New York and be a star. Right? Just what everybody would do, right? Everybody might think of it, but who would actually do it? So she goes to New York and performing as Ellen Cohen. But she does adopt a stage name, Cass Elliot. Don't know if it's part of that switch from her normal domestic life to the entertainment world. Maybe there are too many Cohens in the business, the great Cohens of the music industry and all that. So maybe she just wants to stand out and be different. But she takes the name Cass. Can anyone think of a famous entertainer named Cass? It's this one. Peggy Cass. She was a fan of Peggy Cass. Peggy Cass, this funny, some of us remember her very well from all the game shows. My favorite movie with Peggy Cass, even though she played some significant secondary roles, was in Auntie Mame. She was in Auntie Mame. She's the girl who got pregnant in Auntie Mame. The Great Disgrace. Pregnant girl in Auntie Mame. But that's Peggy Cass. Great comedian, a great performer on television game shows. Marvelous performer. That's where her favorite actress, and so that's where she got Cass. Elliot, totally different vein. One of her schoolmates passed away and apparently had a profound influence on her when someone very young dies. And Elliot was the name of her school friend who died. And so to honor Elliot, she took Elliot as the last name, Cass Elliot. And she began working in New York, in and out and around Greenwich Village, where all the action is. She moves to New York. She's a teenager, getting into her late teens, working as a cloakroom girl. Now, she does make a stab at college. She goes for a while to the American University in Washington, but back soon to New York, because New York is where the action is. New York is where the entertainment is. And she gets a job. 1962, at the ripe old age of 21, she is cast in the touring company of The Music Man. Her voice wins her a job, and she tours in 1962 with The Music Man. I don't know what their itinerary was or where they went. I guess they didn't come to the Peace Center, but was there even a Peace Center in 1962? I don't think there was. Anyway, but that's what she did. So she's getting her credentials. She's been in a successful Broadway touring company. And then in 1963, everyone's looking forward to this, she joins the Big Three. Everybody knows the music of the Big Three, right? Nobody's ever heard of the Big Three. No. It's Tim Rose and Jim Hendrix. It was originally not called the Big Three. It was called the Triumvirate. Three of them. It was Tim Rose, and it was Cass Elliot, and it was John Brown. And John Brown was the tenor. And they are performing as the Triumvirate, performing in and around New York City, maybe down to the beach, maybe to New Jersey, trying to get bookings, the three of them. They're folk singers. They're singing, and then John Brown decides this is enough because, hey, it's a band in the 60s. How long do bands in the 60s stay together? I remember when my older brother, who was there watching with me as we watched the Beatles, and he was inspired, and he opened a band called the Impalas. And he rehearsed like crazy, and the band rehearsed in the garage like crazy, and they were so excited about their band, and I don't think they lasted 90 days. But this is it. This is the excitement. And she's in the Triumvirate, and then one of their members leaves, and Jim Hendrix comes in as the tenor. They play the banjo. They have her voice. They have his voice. They are singing together. They're the Big Three. The Big Three actually do get on television. They perform on the Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. I mean, this is pretty big. They do engagements and become a sort of a house group there. And the Big Three, sort of in New York and the immediate environs, become a Big Three. That's a pretty big group. Followed, of course, just a year later by the Mugwumps. Everyone remembers the Mugwumps, right? Yeah, just like the Big Three, all right? So to understand what's happening between the Big Three and the Mugwumps, none of which you've ever probably heard of, though, by the way, trivia question, I should give bonus points, but you can get a free card in the back that tells you about the media that's available from the library. If you answer this question correctly, what is a Mugwump? Da, 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 da. Anybody got it? No? Well, I can't believe it. They were dissident Republicans in 1884. The Mugwumps. If you're going to name a folk group, why not name them after dissident Republicans from 1884? By the way, Mugwump is originally an Algonquin Indian word which means important people. And it's the fact that a Mugwump, if you're a Mugwump, you're an important person, which apparently the dissident Republicans saw themselves as important people at the time. That's where they took that name. Now, to give you an idea of how the changes go, because you're going to know the next group that we're going to evolve into, I had to make notes of this, just like I had to make a chart to map the bands and how they came together. I'm going to follow Tim Rose. Tim Rose is the fellow who instigates this. Tim Rose is the guiding light. Born 1940, just a year before Mama Cass, or Cass Elliot, was born. He was born in Washington, D.C., raised in Arlington, Virginia, so not that far from Alexandria. In high school, he played the banjo and the guitar and won the school's top music award. He goes off to graduate from Gonzaga College Preparatory School in 1958 and follows that. Instead of with college, he goes off and joins the Air Force for a tour of duty with the Air Force. And then when he's out of the Air Force, still trying to find his place in the world, Tim Rose, a name that you once again probably don't know, Tim Rose becomes a merchant seaman for at least one voyage as a merchant seaman. You got to try that out. You've done the Air Force, and now you're sort of doing the Navy. And then he came back to get a real job. He works in a bank. You know, the starting position, but he really wants to be a musician. So he starts a group called the Singing, now I have to have this written down because I never remember all this. The Singing Strings, performing with Scott McKenzie, Buck Honeycutt, Speary Romig, and Alan Stubbs. All immortal names that you have no clue as to who they are. Now, the Singing Strings lose Scott McKenzie because Scott McKenzie joins a band with a fellow named John Phillips. You know that name, right? And he and John Phillips form a band called the Abstracts with a few other people. The Singing Strings turns into Michael and Timothy because Timothy is Tim Rose and Michael is Michael Boren, who didn't come from the Abstracts, but the Abstracts reorganized as the Smoothies, and then Michael Brown left the Smoothies to join what used to be the Singing Strings and become the Michael and Timothy Show. The Smoothies couldn't take the loss of Michael Brown, so they then changed into a group called the Journeymen, who actually did have quite a few successes. Michael and Timothy, however, added 2 other members to the band and became the Feldmans. Isn't it amazing how many bands I can name that you've never heard of? My brother's band was called the Impalas. You never heard of them either. The Feldmans then became Tim Rose and the Thorns. And then Tim Rose met Cass Elliot. And Cass Elliot joined him and John Brown to become the Triumvirate until John Brown left, which I've already mentioned. And he is replaced by Jim Hendrix. And they are now the Big Three. Not only did they appear on, the Greenwich, at the Bitter End Club in Greenwich Village, they made 2 actual albums. One of them is called The Big Three. That's that album cover. The other one is called The Big Three, Live at the Recording Studio. That's a catchy name. I love that. Now this is a folk group, and among their big hits, Grandfather's Clock. Some of you know this song. Oh, the grandfather's clock was too large for the shelf, so it stood 90 years on the floor. Except, I'm sure, done with the proper verb and vibe and all that. They also did Oh, Susanna, but not to the usual tune. They had their own original tune because, this is folk music. This is art. This is experimental. Oh, Susanna. So the Big Three even toured as an opening act with a young comedian named Bill Cosby. Yeah, back before. So that's what brings her to the Big Three. Now, the Big Three become the Mugwumps when Tim goes off to do something else, start a solo career, which will become pretty much a general failure. He'll become an alcoholic stockbroker, and then only after the year 2000 rise to some prominence as a guy from the 60s who still does music, a retired alcoholic stockbroker. And he will do that in 2001, 2002. He'll be returning to world. But Jim Hendrix is very close with Mama Cass Elliot. In fact, in 1963, they get married. Nobody knows they're married, but they're going to be married for the next 5 years. Though in 1968, the marriage will officially be annulled. because they had by that time all gone their separate ways, and there really wasn't that much of a marriage. But she marries Jim Hendrix, and Jim Hendrix then goes and joins with John Phillips. And joins with John Phillips and Zal Yarovsky. Now, some of you may know Zal. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Zal Yarovsky? Janowski. Sort of a loving spoonful. And John Sebastian. John Sebastian is a studio musician who joins them, and they end up with this group, the Mugwumps, with John Sebastian and Zal Yarovsky and Mama Cass and Jim Hendrix. And eventually, the Mugwumps will fade away as well within less than a year. But Zal Yarovsky and John Sebastian then go off to form the Lovin' Spoonful. And Cass Elliot goes off to join what used to be the Journeymen, which then became the New Journeymen, which then became the Magic Circle. Wait a minute, you've never heard of the Magic Circle. The Magic Circle had John Phillips, his new wife, Michelle Phillips. He had to divorce his first wife so he could marry Michelle Phillips. If I get into the scandals, if we have questions and answers about scandals later, we can go into all kinds of scandals here. But he married Michelle Phillips, and that's what caused them to go from being the Journeymen to being the New Journeymen. And then he also joined up with Scott McKenzie. I believe he was in there. And they all joined back together with Cass Elliot and Denny. There's another member of the Mugwumps named Denny Doherty. And so Denny Doherty is going to go with Cass Elliot and join John Phillips and Michelle Phillips, and they will form the Magic Circle. But then they'll go off to the Virgin Islands as the Magic Circle and get their thoughts together, start preparing their music, and then deciding that the Magic Circle is not a really good name for a band. And so they'll be called the Mamas and the Papas instead. Now, to graph this for you, I have the following chart. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, that on this chart, we have the John Phillips column, where John Phillips goes from being with the Abstracts to the Smoothies to the Journeymen to the New Journeymen, where he is joined by his 18-year-old wife and model, professional San Francisco model, Michelle Phillips, to form the New Journeymen. And over here, we have Denny Doherty, who was with the Hepsters. Hepsters? No? The Hepsters, followed by the Colonials, and then the big, actually significant group, the Halifax Three, because they're all Canadians. And he forms the Halifax Three, which is actually as big a group as the Big Three. And so it's the combination of the Halifax Three and the Big Three that gives you the Mugwumps. And then you combine the Mugwumps with the New Journeymen, and you get the Magic Circle for about 6 months until they decided that was a terrible name, and that became the Mamas and the Papas. Everybody got that? I'll be having I'll be doing notes on this, test on this later. Okay. So let's talk about the Mamas and the Papas there, because this is obviously where she achieves her greatest group fame. You've all heard of the Mamas and the Papas. I'm assuming everybody has heard of the Mamas and the Papas. You heard the singing earlier. This group is a direct result of the Beatles being on television. And everybody's saying, because she's been with the Big Three, she's meeting in her home in where she's staying in Los Angeles with the Halifax Three, with Crosby of Crosby, Stills and Nash, with Gordon Lightfoot. They're all hanging around smoking, I'll just leave it at that, smoking and drinking and listening to music, and they hear this new thing with the Beatles. and they decide to change it. So the Mamas and the Papas are looking for what they're going to do. John Phillips is a very controlling, very focused, we're going to do it this way. He's the guy who writes most of their music. He's very talented. One of the songs that he's very, very famous for is the California Dreaming. California Dreaming. Don't want to do too much, I have to pay royalties. So his wife, Michelle, says that it was the luckiest wake-up call she ever got. He was writing California Dreaming, and he was stuck on some lines. So she was in bed, she was asleep. He woke her up, and so she got up and helped him write a few of the lines for California Dreaming, which means to this very day, she is still collecting royalties as one of the co-writers. Said it was the luckiest wake-up call of her entire life. She's been paid for it ever since then, California Dreaming. So John Phillips, he really likes the banjo. He likes maybe the guitar. Okay, you want to be like the Beatles, maybe we can add a drum set. But he's really married to his folk roots. And he still is envisioning the harmonies and the folk harmonies. And it takes the other three members, Denny Doherty, Michelle Phillips, his wife, and Cass Elliot, to convince him, no, we're not going to be just another folk group. We're going to be different. We're going to have the drummers. We're going to have electric instruments. Oh, no, you've got to be acoustic. This battle goes on to this very day. You go to Asheville, there are performers who would not think of electrifying their equipment. If it's not acoustic, it's not real. Well, they had that argument 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But he resisted. He got outvoted. When there's 4 people in the group, 3 win. And so they became the Mamas and the Papas. They do their first album. They go on tour. They are very successful. If I give the sort of the summary here of the Mamas and the Papas, they ended up headquartering themselves in Los Angeles. They were active from 1966 to 1969. Now, this says 1968. This is accurate. This says 1969. Technically, it's also accurate, though technically they were together till 1971. But they actually broke up in 68. But they had record contracts and show contracts. And even if you're broken up, if you want to get paid for your contract, you find a way, even if you don't have to look at each other, of getting back together and finishing that 5th and final album so that you can get paid what you're due and you don't have to pay $250,000 penalty for each member of your band who doesn't complete their contract. I mean, 1971, $250,000 was actually some money then. Yeah. So they sell, during the course of their ever so brief career there, they sell 40 million records. They have a #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 with Monday, Monday, and another top hit with California Dreamin'. There are others as well, but their influence from that time on is enormous. And once again, like I said, she's bringing people together. Cass Elliot is bringing people together. Their first album is a hit. It's a success. And then they start on their second album, and problems begin to arise. Now, they've already gotten over one little bump. Apparently, Michelle Phillips had perhaps inappropriately had an affair with Denny Doherty, which can cause ripples within a group that's working together. But John Phillips apparently got over it, and the band stayed together until they start their second album, at which time he discovers his wife is sleeping with one of the singers from the Byrds. He is not happy that his wife has taken on yet another friend, And so they decide to kick Michelle Phillips out of the Mamas and the Papas. They do a vote, and just like John Phillips lost the vote to keep it folk and actually go to electrical instruments, this time Michelle Phillips loses the vote and they kick her out. And they replace her with the girlfriend of their record producer, Dunhill Records. And she comes in, she's a very good singer, but after about 2 months with her on stage and the second album being promoted, the group votes again. They'd rather have Michelle back. And so they bring her back. Now, she's already 2 affairs down, plus she helped break up John Phillips' first marriage, perhaps. But that's okay. The first marriage did result in Mackenzie Phillips. Remember Mackenzie Phillips from One Day at a Time? Yes, from One Day at a Time. Yeah. All right. So they're back together as a group. There they are, happy as you can see. By the way, John Phillips did not really want. They had to force him to take Cass Elliot into the group. He said her voice was simply too low, and she was too large. She would make the group look bad. And they said, no, she is talented. She is a great singer. She is like a force of nature. And they insisted that she join. So he grudgingly went along with including her. And of course, as far as singers go, she's going to remain to outlive the Mamas and the Papas and become far greater well-known as a singer than any of the others. Though, I must admit, Michelle Phillips has not done badly. But she only really had 1 album. And then she became an actress, and she appeared on Knots Landing and Star Trek The Next Generation and several other television series for the next 20 or 30 years. And that sort of adds a little celebrity to an ex-mama. So there is a song called Creaky Alley. Creaky Alley is basically a bar in the Virgin Islands, where when they were trying to get the group together, they went down to the Virgin Islands and hung out and relaxed and tried to put all the pieces together, get rid of the magic circle, go with the Mamas and the Papas. Well, they wrote a song called Cheeky Alley. And it is, in their own words, the history of the band. So I thought I would let John Phillips and Michelle Phillips, who wrote this, explain how the band got together. John and Mitchie were getting kind of itchy just to leave folk music behind. John being John Phillips, Mitchie being Michelle Phillips. By the way, this incredible, I have only given you the barest skimming version of all the bands that are interconnected in this period of the 1960s. I have just touched on them. The ones here, the ones I mentioned with Tim Rose, that's just if you want to find the whole story, I'm going to put in a plug here for one of the people that I have contacted or contacted me, and I've been in correspondence with him. His name is Richard. Oh no, I'm going to forget his last name. What is it? Richard Chamberlain? Not Chamberlain. Anyway, I can give you his website. His website is CassElliot.com. And at CassElliot.com, they will advertise his book called Gettin' Kinda Itchy. Because Gettin' Kinda Itchy is 250 pages, which takes all the bands from that time period, and it actually sorts them and their songs and who switched to what and how they rearranged each other right down to, all the complications are spelled out. The cover is a huge montage of all these famous artists who are going to be shuffling around like a pack of cards, getting kind of itchy. And it's from the song Creaky Alley, spelled very weirdly. So John and Mitchie were getting kind of itchy just to leave the folk music behind. Zal and Denny, Zal is Zal Yarnofsky, and Denny is Denny Doherty, who's going to be one of the Mamas and the Papas. Zal and Denny working for a penny, trying to get a fish on the line. In other words, trying to hook some shows. In a coffee house, Sebastian sat, and this is John Sebastian, the musician. By the way, his father, John Sebastian Sr., was a noted studio performer as well in New York. He was a harmonica expert. So in the coffee house, Sebastian sat, and after every number they'd passed the hat, McGuinn and McGuire, two more performers I won't get into, just a getting higher in LA, you know that's where it's at. And there's no one getting fat except Mama Cass. But wait a minute, that's not true. Zally said, Denny, you know there aren't many who can sing the song the way that you do. Let's go south, Denny, said Zally. Golly, don't you think that I wish that I could play guitar like you? So the two of them, one a guitar player, one a vocalist, let's go out and do something new. You've got the two from one group, the two from another group, okay? And after every number they'd pass the, and after every number they'd pass the hat, McGuinn and McGuire, just to get higher in LA, you know that's where it's at, and no one's getting fat except Mama Cass. When Cass was a sophomore, planned to go to Strathmore, but she changed her mind one day. Standing on the turnpike, thumb out to hitchhike, take me to New York right away. Well, actually, she didn't plan to go to Strathmore. She planned to go to the American University, but it just doesn't fit the meter, right? Okay. When Denny met Cass, he gave her love bumps, called John and Zal, and that was the Mugwumps. McGuinn and McGuire chose to go no higher in LA. You know that's where it's at, and no one's getting fat except Mama Cass. Catch your mugwumps, high jumps, low slumps, big bumps. Don't you work as hard as you play. Make up, break up, everything is shake up. Guess it had to be that way. Sebastian and Zal formed the Spoonful. That's when they leave to form the Lovin' Spoonful, which has their own huge number of hits. You'd recognize all of them. Michelle, John, and Denny getting very tuneful. McGuinn and McGuire chose to get no higher, but that's what they were aiming at, and nobody's getting fat except Mama Cass. Okay, everybody, stand up and twerk. We're about to enter into the swim. That's the lyric. I'm not actually inviting you to twerk. And I do have to wonder if the word twerk has changed meaning over the last 60 years. As my son showed me a video of someone twerking, and I don't remember anyone doing that in 1965. Anyway, broke, busted, disgusted, agents can't be trusted, and Mitchie wants to go to the sea. Cass can't make it. She says we'll have to fake it. We knew she'd come eventually, because at first she's not part of the group for the Mamas and the Papas, the Magic Circle. Greasing on American Express cards, which means when they were living there in the Virgin Islands, they were living on credit cards, charging everything. They had no money. They're just charging away. You know, eventually you have to pay, perhaps. So they're greasing on American Express cards. It takes rent, but keeping out the heat's hard, and Duffy's good vibrations, and our imaginations can't go on indefinitely, and California dreamin' is becoming a reality. Yeah, 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 yeah. And California dreamin' is becoming a reality. Yeah, 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 yeah. And California dreamin'. There, the story of the Mamas and the Papas as told by the Mamas and the Papas. Now, there were frictions in this group. There was a big friction after the second album when John Phillips decided that instead of going to the studio and recording their records, he was going to build a studio in his own LA home with the state-of-the-art equipment. He went all the way, $100,000, to install 8-track tape recorders. I mean, everybody was using 4-track, 8-track tape. Whoa, this guy is high tech. So the problem is, as their fame has increased, as the money has rolled in, as some of the other bands who performed with them discovered their enjoyment of the success also included the enjoyment of a great deal of liquor and cocaine and heroin and pills. And sometimes when they came on stage, they sort of stumbled onto stage and mumbled through a show, and this is not how you keep your audiences coming back. No, no, no. And John, who has created his own personal studio, and we're only going to be recording these in my high-tech studio, which means you're going to come to where I am and you're going to do what I say. With Cass Elliot, that doesn't work well because she knows what she wants as well. They are not working well as a team there. And for one thing that she complained about is she had already gotten a contract to do a solo album of her own. And she had recorded her entire solo album in 3 weeks with, a hired band and all that. It took in a studio, 3 weeks, entire album done. She had been working with John on one of their albums. They were contracted to do 5 albums. This is now working on the 4th one. It's taken them over a month to do one song. And she goes, I just finished an entire album in 3 weeks. What is the deal here? Also, other things happened in the group as well. In 1968, Michelle is going to give birth to Chynna Phillips, who we will know in the 1990s from the band Wilson Phillips, which is, and by the way, not only was Chynna Phillips born in 68, in 67, Mama Cass had her baby. Nobody knew that Mama Cass was expecting a baby. That is the wonder of muumuus. A fashion choice, which worked out very well. But, and nobody knew who the father was. And she was not one to tell who the father was. She did get divorced officially from Jim Hendrix. Actually, she wasn't divorced. The marriage was annulled. So technically, the first marriage never happened because it was annulled. But not the father. She has a baby. The baby is Owen Vanessa Elliott. And Owen Vanessa Elliott, who may be watching our presentation live streaming tonight. It is possible. If not, she may be. I know she's been invited to watch, if not live. If so, hello. We all say hello, Owen. We're going to see you on the screen in just a little while. Hope you don't mind. So she has the baby. This is, 1967, having a baby out of wedlock, choosing to be a single mother. This is extremely forward thinking. This is not generally accepted in 1967. But she sets the pace. She does it. As it said in one of the, I love the cutout article from one of the fan mags, now Cass is really a mama. And there she is. Okay. When it comes to how the other band members felt about her, there's a quote that I have to use from Michelle Phillips. She wrote, "I've yet to meet another woman as strong, funny, and fiercely independent as Cass was. She was very generous vocally, too. John would give us those impossibly high notes to sing because he loved the sound of the girls in the clouds. Cass would tell me, 'Just go for it, Mitch. You know I'm going to make it. Come and join me.' And they just did it for fun. And those beautiful harmonies and those rising voices, they did it. And she inspired and guided. Well, the band does break up, and Mama Cass begins her solo career. Now, in effect, it begins in 1968, 1969, though technically the group is still in 1969 performing, but not really. And their last album comes out in 71, but they actually all recorded their parts separately, and they were dubbed together to make that 5th album. But But here she is. And what she does to establish herself, now remember, she's been on television since the early 60s, even with the Big Three, she was doing shows on television. And she continues that. I did include the centerfold. I hope no one's offended. I think it's adorable. And talk about flower power. There you go. But there are some very brave statements up there. There's humor. There's just marvelous. The energy. In 1968, they've had their big success with Dream a Little Dream of Me, which you know is all about her vocal in Dream a Little Dream of Me. And she becomes this featured person on the cover, really. But the group is ending. And then after that, she's on her first major solo. She has a contract with Caesar's Palace to do a week or two of shows at Caesar's Palace. She decides that for the sake of image and for the sake of her career and establishing an independent identity, she's weighing about 300 pounds, and she decides to go on a crash diet. And she loses down to 200 pounds. And she ruins her health. And she ruins her voice. And she ruins no energy. She starts to, her stomach is torn up now. Her stomach is not doing what it's supposed to do. She goes on this special high-fat milk diet thing to try to get her energy back and to heal herself. And she ends up, over a period of just a few weeks, gaining 50 pounds back. You know, the giant yo-yo thing going. So when the big night comes for the opening of Caesar's Palace, it's a disaster. Her voice breaks. She's having a hard time with the energy to get through the show. At the end, they're not cheering and standing and applauding. It's bad. And that's it. Basically, one night, I think they maybe gave her a second night, didn't do much better. They closed the show. Not a good way to start off and into a solo career. But she recovers. She keeps at it. She continues performing. The following year, in 1969, Mama Cass gets her own television program on ABC television. And it's the Mama Cass television program. It's a special. And it's a big success. She's back in the proper form as far as voice and everything goes. She's right on. She continues on. The Western Monty Walsh has a song called The Good Times Are A-Comin'. It's one of the theme songs through the movie Monty Walsh, starring Lee Marvin and Jack Palance. And it's her voice. So she's done the music for a successful movie. She appears in a movie herself as an actress. Does anybody remember The World of Sid and Marty Krofft? H.R. Pufnstuf and all those things? Well, they did a movie, and it was there was one of their series, was it H.R. Pufnstuf with the bad witch? The big nose and the hat and the... So Mama Cass appeared as one of the witches, as one of the super witches. Though the idea of her taking a bath in food and eating as she bathed, it's a little creepy. But she was the witch. She did some featured musical numbers. She played with it. She took it. She grabbed it and did this kid show with the witches and the silliness of the Sid and Marty Krofft. She appeared 70, 71 on pretty much every television show you could have a guest shot. Here I have her with Johnny Cash, John Denver. She's done shows with Danny Kaye in years past. You name it, she was on the show. She's doing harmony. She's doing skits. She gets a second special, this one on CBS. It's the special on CBS that produces with highlights, the album here, Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. It says recreating selected highlights from her CBS television special. And so she's back. Like I said, she's balancing. And she's got her own set of individual albums. Originally, all of her solo albums were listed as Mama Cass until she does the Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. So she's trying to separate herself and her identity. 1972, big comeback. You know, her daughter, now 5 years old, and She's booked for 2 weeks at the London Palladium. This is now in 1974, July of 1974. 2 weeks at the London Palladium. And she goes to the London Palladium and she has like full houses and rave reviews and standing ovations and encores, and it's a huge hit. And she's exhausted herself doing all these shows, but it is the pinnacle of her career. And she goes back to the hotel that night, goes to bed, and never wakes up. Now, the controversy. What is the controversy about the death of Cass Elliot? The ham sandwich. Forever, I remember this became a popular topic. The fat woman dies choking on a ham sandwich. That is not what happened. She died in her sleep of an irregular heart rhythm. It was diagnosed in the autopsy. Others have said she died of a drug overdose because, you know, in the middle 60s, there was a lot of drugs being used of all kinds, though they had given up on the heroin pretty much all through the community because it was just too devastating. But the cocaine was still flowing, as you know it, well into the 70s and 80s. It continues to flow. They haven't really gotten onto the opioids as they have now, you know. So, and I hear, you know, fentanyl. Wow, it's supposed to give a real pack. For those who want to try fentanyl, I hear it'll kill you. So, but in her case, the autopsy showed no drugs were present in her system. She was clear of drugs, but she had what they call a fatty heart. The gaining of weight, the losing of weight had impacted the heart. She had had incidents of arrhythmias for several years, but they were never diagnosed as arrhythmias, where she would faint. And they were saying, well, it's too hot. And being the weight she was, it must be a result of her being overweight and it got too hot. When she was pregnant, well, she's pregnant. That's probably why she had these fainting spells. But looking back now, once they had the autopsy report, it would be a long-term sign that she was suffering cardiac arrhythmias and her heart was slowing, almost stopping, cutting off the blood flow. She would faint, it would return to a normal rhythm. All early warning signs that were overlooked because there were all these other excuses, perhaps. But that night, at the peak of her career, up to that point, who knows where it would have gone from there, she died. And that could be the end of Cass Elliot, but it's not the end of Cass Elliot. Ellen Naomi Cohen, Cass Elliot, died on July the 29th, 1974, at the age of 32. But her fame has continued along with that of the Mamas and the Papas. In the top left corner, there is a picture of, on the far left, or far right, there's John Phillips, and beside him, Denny Doherty, and beside him, Michelle Phillips, and beside her, Owen, I want to get the name right, Owen Elliott Kugel, or is it Kugel? Tell me which it is. Kugel. It's spelled K-U-G-E-L-L. Kugel. Okay. That's the daughter. She's at this point, she would be, what, 31 years old. This is when they were brought into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the official entry into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the Mamas and the Papas. Their 5 albums, their #1 hits, their great influence on music, and her daughter was there to represent her, accepted by the group. Now, in very short order, in just 3 years, John Phillips would die of heart failure. And then just 3 or 4 years after that, Denny Doherty would die of liver failure following some abdominal surgery. Michelle Phillips, however, as I said, she did a solo career. She did an album. It was not a spectacular success, but it was credible. And then she became, you know, she appeared on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And then she was cast in Hotel. And she was cast in several long-term series through the 80s and the 90s. Still doing movies now. a long career as an actress. I'm wondering as I put this together, knowing that Mama Cass loved to do the skits, she loved to do the plays, if she would have gotten a career and done more movie things as well. I would imagine that she would have. If you want to see Michelle Phillips and Mama Cass in a recent movie, though it's not them, it's people playing them, I suggest you check out the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You guys familiar with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? It's the story, it's the fairy tale telling of the murders of the Charles Manson gang. It's the murders in Hollywood the way you would wish for them to have happened. I would typically avoid a movie about those because I remember those murders very well. It was just dreadful. But I would say it's almost therapeutic to watch this movie because it doesn't end up the way history actually had it end up. It ends up the way perhaps we all would have wished it would have ended up, which is like at the end you're going, oh, wasn't that nice? Cool. Yay. So if you haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, hey, and it's got Brad Pitt, you know, a lot of things to see. Okay, so that's the Hollywood Rock and Roll, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In 2020, just a year and a half ago, her star was placed on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. To do that, you have to provide a certain amount of money, provide a sponsorship to maintain the exhibit and all that. And it was done in a public outreach to provide the funding. And it was done like through PayPal and online. And she was officially got her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, well deserved. And that's her daughter there at the signing. Just now she would be, let's see, that's, well, now she's in her mid-50s now. And then you should take a note of this. Just as I'll have to look on my computer. Can't believe Richard. Anyway, the guy who runs, he's a judge in Richmond, Virginia. I should be able to remember his name better. Starts with a C. I want to say Chambers. Yikes. Sorry. But his website, CassElliott.com, has all the information to connect to his getting kind of itchy, which is the whole history of the rock and roll. But this one, by Owen Elliott Kugel, My Mama Cass, a memoir. It is not yet released. It will be coming out in about 5 weeks. You can put in advance orders on Amazon, and it will be available as of May 7th, which will be the latest. And so before you come in June to see the performance by Karen Varanche in the character of Mama Cass Elliott, you could have read the single most recent text about her, which has the family. Now, what happens to her daughter? Well, her daughter had been left with her grandmother, with Cass Elliott's mom, you know, the trained nurse, had been left with her while she went to London to do the shows. And of course, she didn't return alive from the shows. And her sister, Cass Elliott's sister, Leah, ended up taking her in and raising her and part of her family. Her sister, Leah, would have been Leah Cohen, but she married a Kunkel, and she's now Leah Kunkel. And Leah Kunkel herself is a singer. She appeared in a lot of the backup singers and things in the early 70s. Having her sister as successful as she was, I'm sure was a help. But she's done a lot of work herself. You can go online. She's got a Wikipedia page. You got to be somewhere and someone if you got a Wikipedia page, right? And Leah Kunkel has a group of her own called the Coyote Sisters that still perform. Somebody knows the Coyote Sisters? You know the Coyote Sisters. Well, that's Cass Elliott's sister. That is one of the two leads in the Coyote Sisters. And I listened to them online, and lovely, lovely voices, lovely music. There. Yes. Thank you. Campbell. How could I forget Campbell? Richard B. Campbell. Judge Campbell. I have to be respectful. In Richmond, Virginia, he has been called, I think it was Michelle Phillips, that said he was the guiding light, the guy who guarded the eternal flame honoring Cass Elliot. He's the guy who has maintained the website. He's written the book about the history of the groups and all that. And when he heard that Chautauqua in Greenville was doing a show, he wrote immediately to me and welcomed me and opened up resources for me to use and all that kind of stuff. Very helpful. And he's promised he'll tune in to see how we did. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. All right. So I guess we're ready for questions and answers that you might have about the Mamas and the Papas, about the life of Cass Elliot. Any questions? Yes. That was a reprint of a later, after she became successful, they reprinted the cover. So that I didn't have an original cover from the first printing. That's a good point, because it has you're right, it has Mama Cass on there. But that's because they knew they would sell more Big 3 records with the name of Mama Cass on it. So they republished as her after she had already become successful. The actual publication of that album came out after the Mamas and the Papas had already started. But that's why she's on there. Even though she had not acquired that at that time. And a good question, why are they called the Mamas and the Papas? There's some debate over why they're the Mamas and the Papas. One of the things is that they were called the Mamas and the Papas because the Hells Angels, the girls who were the compatriots of the Hells Angels, were known as the Mamas. And it would be to call them the Mamas would make them cool by some kind of a slight reference to the Hells Angels in California and all that. So that's one possibility.
What did she play a prominent role in The Music Man?
No. Remember, at the time she's 20, and I want to say the name it was Miss Merchant or something. I don't remember the exact name, but I do remember Campbell now. I've got the Judge Campbell. But no, in The Music Man, there's a lot of parts in The Music Man. But she's one of the townspeople in The Music Man. But then, of course, that was her first show. She was 20, 21 at the time. That's pretty good if you're still on a touring show. By the way, she tried out for another show and was in contention for another show called I'll Sell It to You Wholesale. But she lost out. The woman who got the title role instead was Barbra Streisand. Yeah.
Owen's father's name ever revealed?
Yes, it was. But Mama Cass never. I'll tell you the story of it. Owen, her daughter Owen went to Michelle Phillips to ask who was her natural father. Michelle Phillips didn't know. Michelle Phillips asked John Phillips and Denny Doherty, and they both knew. The guys all knew who the father was. And so the guys met with Owen and told her the father. And in a rock and roll band, as I understand it, it would be exactly the suspect you would suspect. It was the drummer. But she has discovered her birth father. Yeah. Oh, with the genetics now, it's gotten easier and easier. You could do it without even, doing other things. Any other questions? Yes, and sir, you had a question. Yeah. Back to my chart. Okay, on the chart, notice that John Phillips' line goes down here. Michelle Phillips becomes a solo career and an actress. Cass Elliot, solo career and an actress. All right? They both do movies. They both still do albums, right? But for Denny Doherty and for John Phillips, eventually both of them become involved with the new Mamas and Papas. Okay? So the 70s are really tough on John Phillips. The alcohol, the cocaine, the heroin, the whatever else, especially the alcohol apparently was, the cocaine apparently was taking a heavy toll. But he sort of rallied himself together with the idea of restarting the band. So to restart the band, his biggest success, the Mamas and the Papas, he brought in his daughter, Mackenzie, from his first marriage to a Virginia socialite. That he, got divorced from so he could marry Michelle Phillips. His daughter Mackenzie and Denny Doherty from the original group, and he brings in Ellen Spanky McFarland. Spanky from Spanky and Spanky and Our Gang. Now, don't confuse Spanky and Our Gang with the guy who played Spanky. Spanky is this amazing vocalist, Ellen. And Ellen, by the way, her name is, like Ellen Naomi. And she's also a lady of some presence. And so they reconstituted the band and they did it. And one by one, the members dropped out and they got replaced by other noted performers from other bands. And that group went on from like 1980 to 2000 for almost 20 years. Now, at the end, one critic said that the new Mamas and the Papas were sort of cartoon cutouts of the original. They had replaced all the missing pieces. There's a story I heard in a museum once about George Washington's axe. This is the axe he chopped down the cherry tree with. Of course, due to damage of the handle and wood rot, they had to replace the handle back in 1849. And then due to severe corrosion, they replaced the blade in 1908. But this is the original, it's not quite the original anymore, right? So it was the same with the Mamas and the Papas. They played for a long time. They did tours. They worked hard. There were people, I think Spanky McFarland was with the band for 9, 10, maybe 11 years. But if you can actually look them up online, and the new Mamas and the Papas has a list of all the performers who performed as part of that band over its 20-year run. Pretty much ended in the year 2000, with nobody connected. A year after that, John Phillips dies, but he had already long since left the performing on stage, as had Denny Doherty. Mackenzie Phillips, do you guys know the sad story with Mackenzie Phillips? Yeah, Mackenzie Phillips went on national television telling that she had been abused by her father, John. That he had, when she was still a teenager, given her cocaine, and she woke with him molesting her. And it was something that went on, apparently, to her testimony for years. Now, there are defenders of John who said he would never do something like that. But then it seems like for every one of the people who knew him well who said he would never do something like that, there was someone else who knew him well who said, yeah, that's him, all right. So that was one of those things that's revealed on Oprah's show, kind of a thing. It was, in its day, it was a horrible, horrible story. So all kinds of scandals and such have followed the groups. Any other questions on a more cheerful note? Yes.
I have a question. You talked about Michelle's having been able to inherit some of the stuff. In terms of legacy, financial situations, the families and so forth, a lot of the money I'm sure was wasted, disappeared, whatever. But do you have any interesting comments on that for the different singers?
Owen, her money from her mother was, I believe, placed in trust and has grown over the last 40 years, 50 years. And so I think that she feels she's married, she has a family. She's publishing May the 7th, her book. My Mama Cass, a memoir, has been involved in the commemorations of her mother's legacy. But I think her mother's estate has been very good for the daughter Owen, which I'm sure she would have wanted it to be. John Phillips had another wife and more kids, and but his daughter China from Michelle, she went on to be with Wilson Phillips, the band. In fact, Wilson Phillips, not only did you have Wilson was the son of the guy from the Beach Boys, Brian Phillips. Yeah, the daughter of Brian Phillips, Wilson. So you had the daughter of Brian Wilson and the daughter of John. Two of these major, but they would sometimes be accompanied by Owen Elliott as well, singing with them. There are records of them performing. You can find them on YouTube performing as a group with Wilson Phillips, but you've got Elliott in there too. So the daughter maintained that part of the tradition as well. As far as Denny goes, I don't know. Like I said, he became a stockbroker. No, was he the one that became a stockbroker? No, that was Tim Rice. Never mind. Tim Rose became a stockbroker. Any other questions? If there aren't, I guess the music's not playing anymore, is it? No. Oh.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Oh, and I
Again,
forgot.
please remember to, yeah.
I forgot my one stunt I was going to do during the performance when I switched from the folk music era to the 60s. I was going to switch this to get in the mood, and I forgot till I got up just now and saw it sitting there on the hook. So there, I thought so.